and then it'll take a little bit here. Okay, now we're live. If you would like to type something to, to invite the stream or commenting, do that.
He still looks at it every He had been the analyst very short number of years, but he left university to be a NIL. First game where they switched over. Really got
Okay, thank you. But I was getting two eyes instead.
Oh, yeah.
radio broadcast. Live broadcast, I didn't always think
How's it going? Good. I had to come here for coffee because it's empty. Good at my parents.
Oh, yeah, that's good. The what? Sure. That's all. Oh, good. I'm just here to support you. Just here to support you. She's going to be great. Sure. Why not?
You knew something was going on in September, Don. It just felt.
Did we find out if
I was not surprised. And you know, the Phillies won yesterday.
I know. They beat the Braves, right?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I got you.
He's got the comments going.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure which clock to look at. The computer, the clock, my watch, they're all different. I'm assuming it's getting close to 10 o'clock, if not a little after. So thank you for joining us this morning. And for those of you who are watching online, we do have somebody who is monitoring comments. So if you have questions or comments, we certainly do welcome them today. study, at least until Thanksgiving, is Grieving with Hope. So I thank our DCE, Tim Ripstein, for inviting me to speak on what I've done some research on. And I'm Deaconess Jerry Morrison, for those of you who don't know. And I have a co-host this morning, Jessica.
It's like the Today Show.
Yeah, it is. So, Jessica's our school counselor, and I'll let you.
Yeah, my name is Jessica Brashear, and I'm the school counselor here at St. John for the K-8 school. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, and so Jerry asked me to kind of just be a support person for this, so she's going to talk a lot about her research and from grad school, I believe, and I'm just here to sort of give some commentary on the side and help, so glad to be here.
Because it is both a theological and a mental health issue. So I thought it would be nice to have both disciplines represented in the class. So, let's see.
Can you just start with prayer? Open in
I
prayer?
wanted to talk about potential triggers.
Yes, okay, so as we were talking about this, we recognize that this is a touchy topic and a hard topic, and it might, trigger some emotion or memories or feelings, and as we're all aware, grief can do that, and it can kind of come out of nowhere and just take you by surprise. So before we started, we wanted to just make sure that everyone knows it's okay if you need to just kind of disengage. We won't judge. We will just know you're taking a minute. If you need to step out, please feel free to do that. And if you need prayer, we are available for that afterwards.
Thank you. Now, let's start with prayer.
All right. Good morning, Lord. Lord, you are a God who loves us in our grief, loves us in our joy. You love us in the mundane. Lord, I pray today, this morning, that you would be here among us, speaking your truth through conversation at tables, through what we might lead discussion through into. And Lord, may all that we do glorify you and be pleasing to you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. As I was doing my research for my capstone project, I knew I wanted to work with grieving with hope, and what would that look like? So this Bible study is actually going to get a lot closer to that topic than what I ended up researching. I needed some foundational material before I could do that. But as I was working on this project, I was at a conference, and they hadn't quite cleaned up their garden area yet. And I looked at this, and I said, that is grieving with hope. You've got these little yellow flowers in the midst of the dead and dry and the ugly. And grief comes to us, and well, you get all of that all at the same time sometimes. And it never fails. You give me a microphone and I have to cough. Kind of like putting on sterile gloves and your nose itches. But anyway,
Did you want to have them talk about that a little bit?
sure. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, ideas about this photo and the topic? How does this say anything to you? Does it inspire you?
There's joy if you look for it in different things.
There's joy if you look for it. Thank you. All right.
Sometimes I think one thing that comes to mind, to me, I see the flowers underneath, and they're there, but I think in grief, when you're in the thick and the midst of grief, it takes work to get to it. Like, to me, I see that, and it seems like there's a lot of things that need to be pushed aside and rumbled through, like get out the rake and get to the good stuff. And I think when we're grieving, that it feels like work to find joy. Like, you know it's there. You know that as Christians, it is in us, and it's part of what our hope is, and it's part of the promise of a relationship with Jesus. But it's not always just right on the surface because the grief feels so unbearable.
Right.
So that's what I see.
Right. And And that's when it helps to have somebody to come alongside you to help you see some of those things, because it is such hard work. And I don't think Jesus calls us to bear that alone. So that's why he puts us in community. Another thing that I thought about a lot was this Bible verse from 1 Thessalonians. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. And in my experience, both as a nurse and a deaconess, it seems like people take this verse to mean that being a Christian means I don't grieve. And it gets very, and we don't talk about it so much. But this verse doesn't say we don't grieve. It's just we grieve differently. We grieve with hope. And what does that even look like? So, a lot of sermons I've heard in other places focuses on the hope of the resurrection, the hope of heaven. But our Lord is with us here in the midst of the ugly, the messy, and the painful. And yet we still have hope for the here and now as well as the end times. So, any further questions, comments, inspirations? Yes, Ken?
It's interesting you picked that verse. I found when my mother was dying over the course of a year with brain tumors, she had a lot of questions about end of life. And of course, we all didn't know what's it going to be like or anything. This was a comforting verse for her. We would come to this and we would come to this and read it. It also was comforting to the rest of our family. So, Ethan, you take this too as far as a key verse.
Yeah.
This reminds me of something I talk with the children about. We talk about double dip feelings here at school. That, and I use the analogy of an ice cream cone, where I've got an ice cream cone and I have chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. And that's true about our feelings, that we can have coexisting feelings. There can be joy and there can be grief. When we were going through the COVID shutdown with the kids, I would get on Zoom and I had pictures on the wall behind me, and we were talking about how they might be feeling, they were grieving the loss of their classrooms, their teachers, their friends. A lot of the older kids were missing out on activities that had been planned for them that were suddenly canceled. But they also liked being able to do school from home and in their pajamas and take a break and watch their favorite show and go outside. And so this idea of double dip feelings really speaks to me with this. As Christians, we can have all of those feelings, and sometimes it just feels like maybe the ice cream all got mixed up and it's a big pile of mess. When you stir the bowl and it turns just this weird brown. Sometimes it feels like that, but there's beauty in all of it too.
Yeah, it still tastes good.
It does. Yeah.
So, all right. So, to bore you with a little bit of the statistics that I got from my research, and there's approximately 40% of the Psalms can be classified as lament. So of the 150, almost half of them have a significant lament aspect to them. But one author's research determined that only 12 to 18% of the Psalms are used in, and they were non-moving hymnals. One was, I think it was Baptist, Presbyterian, and Church of Christ that were researched. So only 12 to 18% in those hymnals have lament psalms represented. And as Pastor Scheck mentioned yesterweek, that Psalm 88 is a very heavy lament psalm, and it's not even in the front part of our hymnal. I don't remember if it gets used in our pericope at all. So that's what I did with my research, is finding out how do we use lament psalms in our worship. So I used the 3-year, the 1-year lectionaries, and one of the Psalms of the day used. And my research showed that even if we are using a lament psalm, we're not usually using the lament part. So we're focusing focusing on the hope and the trust and the thanksgiving, and that's great, but there could be more. So what do you think these statistics imply?
Yes. That God recognizes and knows that we will grieve because He's given His word, and He shows us in all of the Psalms, 40% of them, that there is grief. But we have a tendency, by only using 12 to 18% of it, that we're repressing that.
We're repressing it, yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Comment? Yeah. So, yes, Tim?
I guess it makes me wonder what we're missing out on.
What are we missing out on?
If there is more language, experiences, expressions of laments of various kinds, but yet we're not taking advantage of those as if it's a gift that we're not really utilizing much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the same thing. And, all right. Turn the page. So, the author that I was researching with, this was his premise, that we're losing the language of lament. And I've heard it often said that if we're not hearing the languages from the pulpit, then we're not going to have them to use with us the rest of the week, whether it's lament or hope or whatever. But God meeting us where we are, and if it doesn't come from the pulpit to begin with, it can't flow through the rest of our lives. And I think St. John does a much better job at this than a lot of the other churches that I've been with. Our pastors do recognize that sometimes life gets ugly and it's hard, and they show us Jesus in the midst of that. So, but we're unique.
I wonder, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I wonder if some of that has come from the last several years and what we've been facing globally, and we've had a lot of deaths, a lot of funerals here at St. John. There's just been a lot of grief. There's been a lot of grief on the school side. Heavy things that have always existed, but I think, this is my opinion, I think in the last 3 years it's been put more in front of us, and it has, it's something that we've been talking about, we've been witnessing, you see on the news, and we felt it here in our community on a larger scale. So that's one thing I did. And I think we should have them maybe turn at your tables and talk about your experiences with this statement. What have you seen or noticed about how we talk about lament or grief?
We'll have you talk at your tables first.
And maybe some of you from our wiser generations, like how have you seen it change? Has it changed over time? In your experience, like what we as a culture, I think culturally, both secular and Christian, let's do that. How do we address grief and sorrow?
We'll give you a couple minutes to talk at your tables. If you're alone, please join another.
She has a good question. How do you define lament?
Defining lament. Well, I think we'll get to that. How do you define lament? There's a lot of different types of lament. It's on one of the next slides. I guess I should have put it up, but we'll skip that then. There's grieving over or suffering through sickness and death, of course. Being sorry or lamenting over your own personal sins. Grieving over injustice done to others because of other people's sins. So there's a lot of different types of lament within that.
Is it like brokenness? Is that
51, which, you know, is a confession psalm, I think of that as maybe a psalm of brokenness, where David, assuming it's, you know, the time when he's confronted by his situation with Bathsheba, and he recognizes his sin as brokenness. And so, yeah, I would think that there are some psalms that we recognize our need.
Right.
Brokenness. So, yeah.
Does that help, Carrie? Does that help? Okay. Sorry, go back to what you were doing. We had a question. Okay, talk amongst yourself.
Now you just. think we'll give you a 1-minute warning and we'll come back together and hear some of your ideas.
He has brought up in around this time with all the things that can be done that probably bring them back. So there's the editing that are not posted on the themselves. They're kind of listening to the training right? The other hand, there's the prophecy and the call not stated in real quick. So there was this corporate target as well. There was a like David, or Joe, but there was all this talk that God wanted to go with that trying to tell them what they want to so just kind of like looking at the whole state of intractable that's kind of what our home does.
Okay, is anybody willing to share something that you discussed at your table? Sounds like some great conversations going on. Anybody? Does table have anything that they want to share?
Well, we just talked how it's important to have those feelings and share those feelings and acknowledge them, basically.
Right.
To acknowledge those feelings of grief and lament.
It's important to acknowledge the feelings and have them, experience them, yes. How about the back table?
We kind of went broad. We all have aging parents
Oh, yeah, aging parents.
in decline, health-wise and stuff, and we would like to be able to spend more time with them, but can't because of other responsibilities and whatnot. So there's always, for us, a lingering sense of guilt. That thing. For my mom, she sort of expected me to spend 24/7 with her, and I was 4 hours away working.
Yeah.
So I spent a couple of days with her each week and then try to work the rest of the week and stuff. And I knew that wasn't enough for her, but I just couldn't do more.
Right.
And yeah, so there's always a sense, for us, a sense of guilt, which we kind of use for a broad category.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's just another type of lament that I didn't list elsewhere, so, yes.
This was so very timely because my parents have been going through a struggle and not able to be there quite as much as they'd like this past couple of weeks. And it was convicting to see what I kind of consider complaining is really a lament. It's just coming out, not, oh Lord help me, but where are you? Where you're running.
And so many of the Psalms do that. Where are you? How long, O Lord? Yeah.
Just need to reframe it a little bit.
Yeah, reframing from complaining to lament. Yeah, great. Great stuff. Okay, how about this front? This side?
Well, we talked mainly about, like if you have lost a loved one, how important it is for other people to come, like others, like we were talking about, like women that have all lost their husbands. A lot of times the women all get together, we'll meet and things like that, and then it just gives a unity of some type there in that too. And I know, and I told him, so I found that after my husband passed away, that people avoided sometimes talking even about him or discussing, things and that. And after a period of time,
TV lamentations. They're just everywhere.
Yes.
And how can we spend enough time praying for all those people that you hear on TV? So we can't. So we have to rely on the Lord. And, say, Lord, bless them all.
Yes, yes, good point, thank you. So, what I'm hearing is that you have noticed that our culture does downplay and avoid, especially regarding death and dying and mourning. So what are some of the euphemisms that you've heard being used in that regard to help us avoid saying death, dying, dead?
Kick the bucket.
Kick the bucket. What else?
Pushing up daisies.
Pushing up daisies.
Tim knows them all. He's already known.
Celebrations of life.
Celebrations of life. Positive spin. Yep. Right?
Past.
Yeah, past. When I hear my nurse brain kicks in when someone says somebody passed, like, did you pass a test or pass a kidney stone? What does that really mean? Yeah.
Long sleep. People,
Okay.
parents maybe sometimes use that with if a dog has died, no, the dog is dead. But children don't know what that means, so that can be really confusing too.
Yeah. And I've heard if you use sleep terms instead of death with children, then they're afraid to go to sleep
Yes.
because they're afraid they're going to die and they don't have the word to put with that. So, yeah, there can be lots of layers and lots of complications. And, yeah. So, are any of you familiar with Patch Adams? The movie Patch Adams? Oh, good, it looks like it's going to work. Celebration. So this is the scene where Patch Adams was a medical student and the patient was recently diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So that's a pretty quick and very painful existence. When I was a nurse, it was a very high mortality, and now people are actually surviving it. So there's been improvements in our medical abilities, but the patient had even thrown a bedpan at Patch Adams. He was just angry at everybody. Anger is part of grieving, and he needed to do that. But in order to break through to the guy, Patch Adams dresses up as an angel, and they start bantering back and forth with a bunch of euphemisms. Some of them actually do say death and dying, but oh, that didn't work. Go back. Let's find it. Yep. Well, I can do the escape button and come back to where I was. It probably has to refocus itself here. Well, I just made it work earlier. Yeah. Oh. Okay, there's that, but no, it's not up on right. There it goes. Uh-oh.
Alright, okay.
Thank you, Josh.
I don't want to yet.
Oh, I thank you for trying.
This happened to me this past week with all the 8th graders. I had this beautiful PowerPoint presentation, and I had a whole bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds staring.
Okay.
Talk about nervous sweat. once you lose control of that classroom, you've lost control. So stay. We have adults here, so you just talk amongst yourselves. We'll get it figured out.
Well, it would have to be. Golly, this is.
It was. Yeah, we did it tested fine for the year from you.
Oh, wow. Oh, you know what?
Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay. Thank you.
Preview of coming attractions. First, death, to die, to expire, to pass on, to perish, to peg out, to push up daisies, push up posies, to become extinct, curtains, deceased, demise, departed and defunct. Dead is a doornail, dead is a herring, dead is a mummy, dead is nymph. The last breath, paying a debt to nature, middle of sleep. God's way of saying, slow down. Check out. To shuffle off this mortal coil. To head for the happy underground. To blink for an exceptionally long period of time. I myself without breath. To eat an incredible decaying mass. Warm buffet. Candlelight. By the farm. Take the cab. Cash in for chips. And if you're buried to ass, I'll give a place to park my bike.
So, how are euphemisms helpful or not helpful?
I think it can, give a little lightness to the topic. But I think if you grieve with hope, you can kind of bypass the sarcasm of it because you know in your heart
Yeah.
what, what the
Yes.
true picture is.
Yes. Thank you. Anybody else?
Depends on when and how they're used.
Very good. Would you like to say more about that?
Well, I think that there are times when you were talking about, sometimes people are maybe hesitant, they don't know what to say. And so, sometimes in lacking for people knowing what to say, they try and say something, and it may not always be what you as the person lamenting or grieving or suffering or whatever are ready to hear, even if in there's a line of truth. So sometimes I think it's just the timing. Sometimes it comes across in the way it's said as a lack of understanding. It's like, well, I gotta say something, so here it is. And, so it's on both sides. It's on the giving end and also on the receiving end. So sometimes maybe people don't say anything because they don't know what to say and figure they'd rather say nothing than say something that's going to be hurtful to you. Maybe others are, well, I feel like I gotta say something, so whatever comes out, first thing comes out, and now, you know, I'm left to, okay, how do I, as the hurting person, deal with it? I think, an example, I think to the time when we had a miscarriage, and, you know, well-meaning people, well, there was probably something wrong with the child, with, you know, and therefore it's better off, or you're better off. So, you know, that's what I mean. It's how it's said, what and when it's said.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And sometimes the best thing to do is just say, I care, because I don't understand what you're going through. There's no way, especially with miscarriage, that's never happened to me. So I can't understand from that, but I do care about you, and I do care about what you're going through, whatever your loss. And I was talking with Jessica while you were talking at your break that I think euphemisms help us put a little bit of separation between what's really happening, because to put the opposite end of the spectrum, when a woman is pregnant and having given birth and raising that new child, there's childbirth classes. You probably have your mom and your sister and your cousins and all your friends, and everybody's gathered around you caring and support, and what do you need, what can I do for you, and just all this care, support, and information, and then it gets to end of life, and there seems to be a void of information. I've heard there's even a death doula now, kind of like a midwife, to help guide people through that. And but hospice can do that to some extent. We just don't tend to call them in soon enough to be as effective as they could be. But we don't want to give up hope either. So I get both parts of that. So do you think that the plethora of euphemisms that we use can contribute to losing the language of lament? Those are turning.
Yes.
I'm terrible at writing my own questions.
Because we're not then, you know, we're not facing it. We're not talking about it. We're not dealing with it in its reality. We're kind of trying to push it off someplace. It's real.
Yes.
It's very real, and every one of us has experienced it in our lives. So when we use the little euphemisms, it feels, or it can feel dismissive. You know, just, okay, get over it, move on.
It becomes about you, that you're being comfortable, rather than the person on the right, and letting them feel what they're feeling.
Yeah.
It can.
Thank you. So
I think you had mentioned the void. I think that just as a culture, what I see and I've experienced is silence is hard for people. And silence in grief is extremely hard. Like, even up here when we're talking and there's silence, does anybody feel uncomfortable? We're not comfortable with silence. And I think as a counselor, that was one of the things in grad school that I remember them really trying to teach us, is to be comfortable with silence, because that's where really the good stuff happens. Reflection and connection. But you can't do that if you're filling the void with just blabbing things that end up actually hurting people more than they're helping people. In fact, I talked with the first graders this week, and I had never heard this thought that we have mouths that close and ears that don't. That must be for a reason. We were talking about listening and how much more we can do and learn when we stop talking and we listen. And the kids knew they got that, right? My mouth does close, but my ears won't close. And I think that's just kind of a beautiful picture for this topic too, that we will get so much more and we will connect so much better in lamenting with those we love and care about when we close our mouths and we open our ears and our hearts. And when we don't know what to say, to own that too and say, I just don't even know what to say right now, but I know this is the hardest thing you've ever done, and I'm here with you.
And maybe inviting the person to talk and being able to be present with them as they speak. Cool, thank you. We already talked about this a little bit. I'm sure there's even more. In fact, we've come up with a couple more since I talked about this. But in the Psalms, we see Psalms related to people who are sick. There's death involved, there's confession of sins, and injustice toward others. Some Psalms are written from the perspective of an individual, and some are written from the perspective of an entire community. And either one can be used in worship and corporately. But one of the discussions I had in my last morning class, we talked a lot about how even positive, happy, well-expected events in life can have aspects of grieving. When you get married, you lose that you're an individual, or not that you're an individual, but you're not just focused on yourself. And then you have children, and there's more people to be responsible for, and your own needs get set aside. You get a promotion or retired, and your coworkers are no longer and those relationships are very drastically changed, and that's a source of grieving, even in the midst of this wonderful event that you've been looking forward to for a long time and working hard for. So, any other ideas on that? Types of grieving? So,
What I had concerns like the brokenness in our family, so abuse, alcoholism, those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of lamenting in that too, the hard things of family life that sometimes we don't openly talk about, but every family has something. Mental illness, we're all struggling with something, but some of those things are just more visible than other times. But there's definitely lamenting in that, and it's lamenting in silence. And in a lonely place, because maybe there's shame involved, or there's things that are too hard to talk about.
Yeah. I was at a Christian comedian show several years ago, and he started his show by saying, if you come from a dysfunctional family, raise your hand. Now look around. Everybody else that doesn't have their hand raised, they're in denial. So we all have some level of dysfunction. And as our table in the back mentioned, grief and suffering can have lots of layers. You're grieving that your parent is getting older, they're losing their capacity, maybe they have a debilitating disease, so that's another layer, and you're watching this happen and you can't be there as much, and the relationship is changing, and maybe now you have to start making decisions for your parent, and there's just so many layers and complications with it. And there's no easy answer. So, yeah. So what I'd like you to do now is go to the handout with Psalm 142. It's 1:15, so we're almost done. I think we'll read through it first, and then I'll just show you the answers. But
Come back to this next week too.
possibly, yeah. So, but I didn't want to leave you without a psalm. Psalm 142. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I have brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. I picked this psalm because it shows that most of the lament psalms have so many different aspects to them. Verses 1 and 2, this is one author's idea, are an initial plea. Verses, the first half of 3, the first two phrases, are an affirmation of confidence, that even though I'm going through this, I still trust in the Lord. And then the second half of 3 and 4, he lays out his complaint very vividly to God. And then there's an invocation, another affirmation of confidence. And then 6 through half of 7 is a petition and a revisit to the complaint, explaining that a little bit more. But in the midst of that, vowing that I will still focus on you, Lord. So I think we'll pick up on this again next week. And we'll dive into one of the other lament psalms as well and see maybe how is it used in our worship, if it is, and go with that. So let me close us in prayer. Our gracious Lord God, we do thank you for this day that you've given us, the opportunity to worship you in spirit and in truth. I ask that you would come alongside us and make your presence known to us as each one of us are grieving in some way. Help us to see your hope and your plan and fill us with your comfort, that we may be a comfort to others. Father, I also thank you that you know all of our deepest cares and concerns, and that you're already preparing to meet needs that we don't even know about yet. So we thank you for these things in the precious name of our Savior, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everybody.